I thought my coworker was helping me until I saw my name in his private emails. The moment I saw my name in Nathan's email draft folder, my coffee cup froze halfway to my mouth. Not because he was writing about me, that happened in offices every day, but because the subject line read, Phase 3, Final Documentation, and the recipient was our CEO's personal attorney. I'd stayed late to finish a presentation on Nathan's computer because mine had crashed, and he'd told me his password that morning when I asked to pull a file. "Just log in as me, man. I trust you," he'd said with that easy smile that made everyone in the office love him. The same smile he'd given me 6 months ago when he'd offered to mentor me through my first major project. The draft was dated from 3 days ago, and my hands started sweating as I clicked it open, because Nathan Davies had been the only person at Kellerman and Associates who'd made me feel like I wasn't drowning. I'd started at the consulting firm 8 months earlier, fresh out of my MBA program, and terrified I'd be exposed as the imposter I felt like. The company specialized in corporate restructuring, which meant we told failing businesses how to stop failing, usually by firing people and cutting budgets until the numbers looked better on paper. My role was junior analyst, which mostly meant building spreadsheets that senior consultants like Nathan would present to clients while I sat silently in the corner. Nathan was 36, a senior partner on the fast track to managing director, and from day one, he'd treated me differently than the other seniors treated their analysts. While most of them barely learned our names, Nathan took me to lunch during my first week. "This place will eat you alive if you let it," he'd said, ordering us both the salmon special without asking what I wanted. "But if you attach yourself to the right people and learn fast, you can make a fortune here before you're 35. He had dark hair starting to gray at the temples, wore suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and spoke with the kind of confidence that made you believe everything he said was both true and for your benefit. The file I was looking at now was 17 pages long. The first page was a timeline. January 15th. Subject hired, initial assessment positive. That was my start date. February 3rd. First major error documented. Subject miscalculated overhead projections for Midwest Medical acquisition. Missed deadline. I remembered that project. I'd worked 70-hour weeks and Nathan had told me I'd done great work, that the client was thrilled. March 12th. Subject showed resistance to correction, requires additional management oversight. I scrolled faster, my throat tightening. April 26th. Performance review submitted to HR with concerns about analytical capabilities and team communication. I'd never seen that performance review. Nathan had told me in our one-on-one that month that I was exceeding expectations and that he'd submitted glowing feedback to our department head. May 8th. Subject made critical error in Donovan Industries presentation, necessitating client apology and fee reduction. That presentation had been Nathan's. I'd built the models, but he'd presented them, and afterward he'd taken me aside and said the client had some concerns about the data, but that he'd smoothed it over, and I shouldn't worry about it. My vision started tunneling as I reached the most recent entries. June 3rd. Documentation phase complete. Recommendation, termination with cause, no severance, initiated through standard performance improvement plan to establish legal basis. June 10th. Meeting scheduled with legal counsel to review documentation and ensure compliance with employment law. Subject remains unaware of performance concerns per strategy. Today was June 14th. The meeting with legal counsel was tomorrow morning at 9. I minimized the window and just sat there, staring at Nathan's desktop background, a photo of him skiing in Aspen with his wife and 2 kids, all of them grinning like they'd never known a day of worry in their lives. My apartment was 600 square feet in a building where the elevator broke twice a month. I had $83,000 in student loans and a car that needed a new transmission I couldn't afford. This job was supposed to be my way out, my chance to finally stop feeling like I was one missed payment away from disaster. And the person I'd trusted most here had spent 6 months systematically destroying my career while pretending to be my mentor. I pulled out my phone and took photos of the email, my hands shaking so badly that the first 3 came out blurred. I steadied myself against the desk and took 5 more, making sure every word was legible. Then I forwarded the entire email chain to my personal account, deleted it from Nathan's sent folder, cleared his deleted items, and logged out. The office was empty except for the cleaning crew down the hall, their vacuum cleaner humming rhythmically. It was 8:30 on a Wednesday evening. Nathan had left at 5, stopping by my desk to tell me I was doing outstanding work on the current client pitch and that he'd see me tomorrow morning to review my latest analysis. I'd believed him. Even now, sitting in his chair with proof of his betrayal glowing on his monitor, part of my brain was trying to rationalize it. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe this was some kind of test or corporate strategy exercise. Maybe Nathan was protecting me from something worse by documenting everything carefully. But I'd worked in corporate environments long enough to recognize a termination file when I saw one, and this was textbook. Every error he'd documented was either his own mistake that he'd blamed on me or a completely fabricated incident that never happened. I drove home in a daze, barely registering the 40-minute commute through downtown traffic. My apartment felt smaller than usual when I walked in, the walls pressing close like they knew what was coming. I forwarded the photos to my personal email again, then backed them up to 3 different cloud storage services, my paranoia ratcheting higher with each upload. Then I just sat on my couch in the dark, staring at my phone screen, reading through the email over and over. Nathan had been so careful. Every entry was dated, specific, and written in the kind of measured corporate language that would hold up in any legal proceeding. He documented meetings that never happened, cited performance issues that were entirely fictional, and created a paper trail that painted me as an incompetent analyst who'd been given multiple chances to improve, but had consistently failed. The worst part was how believable it all was. If I were an outside observer reading this file, I'd think I was exactly the kind of employee who deserved to be fired. Nathan had even included what looked like copies of corrective feedback emails he claimed to have sent me, except I'd never received any of them. He'd either created them in a draft folder or sent them to himself and altered the headers. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and wrote down everything I could remember about the past 8 months. Every project, every meeting, every interaction with Nathan. I pulled up old emails, calendar invites, anything that could contradict his version of events. The Midwest medical acquisition he'd claimed I'd miscalculated? I found the original spreadsheet I'd submitted, the one Nathan had presented to the client, and compared it to the final contract terms. My projections had been almost exactly correct. The client had signed based on numbers I'd generated. The Donovan Industries presentation where he said I'd made critical errors. I had the original deck I'd built, complete with tracked changes showing where Nathan had edited my work, and the thank you email from the client praising the thorough and insightful analysis. Every single error he'd documented was either his own mistake or something that had never happened. He hadn't just been setting me up for termination. He'd been constructing an elaborate fiction about my performance while simultaneously telling me I was doing great work. I called in sick the next morning, which I'd never done before. My manager, Patricia Brennan, sounded surprised when I told her I had food poisoning. "Feel better," she said. "Nathan mentioned you two have a review meeting scheduled for this afternoon, so I'll let him know you'll need to reschedule." The review meeting. I'd completely forgotten. Nathan had told me on Monday that he wanted to go over my progress and discuss my development plan for the next quarter. Now I knew what that meeting really was, the start of his performance improvement plan, the official beginning of my termination. I spent the morning searching online for employment lawyers. Most of them wanted retainers I couldn't afford, consultation fees that would drain what little I had in savings. I finally found one who offered free initial consultations, a woman named Diana Kowalski, who specialized in wrongful termination and workplace discrimination. Her office was in a strip mall 40 minutes from my apartment, sandwiched between a nail salon and a tax preparation service, and when I walked in at 2 that afternoon, she was eating lunch at her desk while reviewing a file. Diana Kowalski was probably 50, with gray-streaked hair pulled into a messy bun and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. Her office was cramped and cluttered, every surface covered with case files and legal pads, but when I showed her the photos on my phone, she stopped eating and read through every page twice. "How long have you worked there?" she asked. I told her 8 months. "And this Nathan Davies, he's been your direct supervisor the entire time?" I nodded. She pulled out a yellow legal pad and started taking notes. "Walk me through every interaction you remember. Start from day 1. Don't leave anything out, even if it seems irrelevant." I spent 90 minutes telling her everything. She interrupted occasionally to ask clarifying questions, to request documentation I might have saved. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me. "You understand what he's doing, right? This isn't just standard termination documentation. This is preemptive legal protection. He's building a case against you before you even know you need to defend yourself, which means when you're fired, you'll have no recourse, because there will be a file showing you were a problem employee from day 1. "But none of it is true," I said, hearing how desperate I sounded. Diana nodded. "That's irrelevant in most cases. Truth is what you can prove, and right now, he has 6 months of documented performance issues and you have, what? Some old emails and spreadsheets that contradict his narrative?" She wasn't wrong. I'd spent the morning gathering evidence, but most of it was circumstantial. I had project files that showed my work was good, but Nathan could argue that he'd had to fix everything behind the scenes. I had thank you emails from clients, but he could say he'd coached me through those projects. "However," Diana continued, "you have something most people in your situation don't have. You have his entire termination strategy in writing, obtained before he initiated any official action. That changes everything." She pulled out a contract from her desk drawer. "I'll take your case on contingency, which means I don't get paid unless we win. But you need to understand what you're signing up for. This will get ugly. Nathan Davies will claim you accessed his personal files without permission. Your company will circle the wagons and protect their senior partner. You might still lose your job. You will definitely make enemies. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Nathan's smile, the way he'd invited me to his house for a barbecue last month, introduced me to his wife, let his kids show me their treehouse. I thought about how he'd sat across from me at lunch 3 days ago and told me I had real potential, that he saw himself in me, that he was going to make sure I succeeded at this company. I thought about the email I'd read, the cold calculation in every entry, the way he'd documented my destruction like it was just another project to be managed efficiently. "Yes," I said. "I'm prepared." Diana smiled for the first time since I'd walked in. "Good. Because we're going to burn his entire career to the ground, and we're going to do it with his own words. The plan Diana laid out was both simple and terrifying. We wouldn't confront Nathan directly or tip our hand to the company. Instead, we'd let him proceed exactly as he'd planned, documenting everything along the way while simultaneously building our own case. He's going to call you in for a meeting soon, Diana explained. Probably within the next week. That's when he'll initiate the performance improvement plan. He'll present you with documentation of your alleged failures, give you 30 or 60 days to improve, and then terminate you when you inevitably fail to meet whatever impossible standards he sets. Standard corporate termination playbook. She pulled out her phone and opened a recording app. When he calls that meeting, you're going to record every second of it. Virginia is a one-party consent state, which means you can legally record any conversation you're part of. You're also going to start documenting every interaction you have with him, every email, every meeting, every conversation. I want dates, times, witnesses if possible. Most importantly, you're going to act like nothing has changed. He needs to believe you're completely unaware of what's coming. That was the hardest part. I went back to work on Friday, still recovering from food poisoning, and when Nathan stopped by my desk at 9 a.m, I had to smile and thank him for checking on me. I was worried about you, he said, perching on the edge of my desk the way he always did, like we were old friends catching up. Patricia said you sounded pretty rough on the phone. Up close, I could see the details I'd never noticed before. The expensive watch on his wrist, probably worth more than 3 months of my salary. The subtle monogram on his shirt cuff, the way his eyes never quite matched his smile. I'm feeling better, I told him. Sorry I missed our meeting yesterday. Nathan waved it off. No problem. Actually, I wanted to reschedule that for Monday morning, first thing. I think it's time we had a serious conversation about your trajectory here. Set some concrete goals for the next phase of your development. His tone was warm, encouraging. Exactly the same tone he'd used for 8 months while documenting my fictional failures. That sounds great, I said, and I meant it, because now I knew exactly what Monday's meeting was really about. I spent the weekend at Diana's office, going through every scrap of evidence I'd collected. She brought in a paralegal, a young guy named Owen Thatcher, who looked like he was maybe 25, but who apparently had a photographic memory and could cite employment law precedent from memory. The email is damning, Owen said, but we need more. We need to prove that Davies deliberately falsified performance issues, and ideally, we need to show motive. Why would a senior partner spend 6 months systematically destroying a junior analyst's career? That was the question I'd been asking myself all weekend. I wasn't a threat to Nathan. I didn't compete with him for promotions or clients. I'd done nothing to anger him or challenge his authority. As far as I could tell, I'd been the perfect subordinate, hardworking, deferential, grateful for his mentorship. Sometimes there's no complex motive, Diana said. Sometimes people do terrible things because they can, because it entertains them, or because they need a scapegoat for their own failures. But if we can find a pattern, other analysts he's done this to, other instances of fabricated documentation, that strengthens our case considerably. Monday morning arrived with the kind of cold, gray rain that matched my mood. I got to the office at 7:30, an hour before Nathan had scheduled our meeting, and set up my phone in my shirt pocket with the recording app running. Diana had coached me on what to say and, more importantly, what not to say. Let him talk, she'd instructed. Let him present his version of events without interruption. The more he says, the more material we have to work with. If he asks you to sign anything, read it carefully and ask for time to review it with a lawyer. He'll probably tell you that you don't need a lawyer, that this is just a formality. That's when you'll know we've got him. At 8:30, Nathan's assistant, a woman named Rebecca, who'd always been friendly to me, stopped by my desk. Nathan's ready for you, she said, and I noticed she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. She knew. Of course she knew. She probably helped him type up the documentation. Nathan's office was corner suite, windows overlooking the city, furniture that probably cost more than my car. He gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs across from his desk, and I noticed there was already a folder waiting on the table between us. Thanks for coming in, he said, settling into his own chair with the kind of ease that came from years of these conversations. I wanted to touch base with you about some concerns that have come up regarding your performance over the past several months. His voice was gentle, almost apologetic, like he was delivering bad news that pained him personally. I've been reviewing your work on the major projects we've handled together, and I've noticed some patterns that are concerning. Missed deadlines, analytical errors, communication issues with clients. Nothing catastrophic, but consistent enough that I think we need to address it formally. He slid the folder across to me. I've documented specific instances here, along with feedback I've provided along the way. I want to be clear. This isn't a termination conversation. This is me, as your mentor, trying to help you course correct before these issues become serious career problems. I opened the folder and pretended to read, even though I'd already seen every page of it in his email. The documents were beautifully formatted, professionally presented, exactly the kind of thorough management paperwork that would impress any HR department or legal team. There were incident reports, copies of alleged feedback emails, performance metrics showing my productivity declining over time. I don't remember receiving these emails, I said carefully, pointing to one of the feedback messages dated from March. Nathan nodded sympathetically. I know, and that's part of the problem. You've been somewhat resistant to feedback, which is common for high-achieving people who aren't used to criticism. I've tried to address these issues in our one-on-ones, but I don't think the message has been getting through. That's why I think a more formal performance improvement plan is necessary. It gives us structure, clear goals, measurable outcomes. 30 days to demonstrate improvement in these specific areas, with weekly check-ins where we can track your progress together. What happens if I don't improve? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Nathan's expression turned somber. Let's not think about that right now. Let's focus on the positive. You're talented, you have potential, and I believe you can turn this around. But I need you to take this seriously and recognize that there are consequences if these patterns continue. He pulled out another document. This is the formal performance improvement plan. It outlines the specific concerns, the improvement benchmarks, and the timeline. I need you to sign it, acknowledging that you've received this feedback and understand the expectations going forward. I stared at the paper, at Nathan's signature already at the bottom, at the little flagged tabs showing where I was supposed to initial and sign. Everything Diana had told me was coming true exactly as she'd predicted. Can I have some time to review this? I asked. Nathan's smile faltered slightly. There's nothing to review. This is standard HR procedure. If you have concerns, we can discuss them right now, but I need this signed before you leave today so we can officially start the improvement period. I'd like to have a lawyer review it first, I said, and watched Nathan's entire demeanor change. The warmth vanished from his eyes. His jaw tightened. Why would you need a lawyer? This isn't a legal matter. This is performance management, something that happens to thousands of employees every day. If you're not willing to engage with this process in good faith, that tells me everything I need to know about your commitment to improving. His tone had shifted from mentor to adversary in seconds. I'm not saying I won't sign it, I said quickly, playing the role Diana had coached me on, confused, overwhelmed, but not confrontational. I just want to make sure I understand everything before I agree to it. That seems reasonable, right? Nathan stood up, signaling the meeting was over. You have until end of business today. If this isn't signed by 5 o'clock, I'll have to escalate this to HR and recommend immediate termination for insubordination. Your choice. He walked to his door and opened it, waiting for me to leave. I'm trying to help you, he said as I passed him. I hope you realize that before it's too late. I went directly to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and checked the recording on my phone. It was perfect. Every word crystal clear, Nathan's threats captured in his own voice. I sent the file to Diana immediately, then sat there shaking for 5 minutes, trying to process what had just happened. The mask had slipped. Nathan wasn't even pretending to be my mentor anymore. He'd gone from supportive to threatening in the span of one conversation, and now I understood what Diana had meant about things getting ugly. I forwarded the recording to Owen as well, then spent the next 2 hours at my desk pretending to work while actually researching Nathan's history at the company. I pulled up old employee directories, checked LinkedIn profiles of former analysts who'd worked under him. I found 3, all of whom had left Kellerman and Associates within a year of starting, all of whom listed Nathan as their supervisor. One, a guy named Austin Graves, had even left a cryptic review on Glassdoor. Beware senior partners who seem too friendly. Not everyone survives the mentorship process. I sent Diana all 3 names. By noon, Owen had tracked down Austin Graves through LinkedIn and cold called him. Austin agreed to meet that evening at a coffee shop near his new office. Diana drove me there herself, arriving early to brief me on what questions to ask. Austin showed up 15 minutes late, looking wary and exhausted. He was maybe 30, wearing a slightly rumpled suit, and the moment Diana introduced herself as an employment lawyer, he almost walked out. I signed an NDA when I left Kellerman, he said. I can't talk about my employment there. Diana nodded. You can't disparage the company or disclose confidential business information, but you can discuss your personal experiences in factual terms, especially if you're being asked to provide information relevant to ongoing workplace violations. Nothing you say here will violate your agreement unless you make false statements or reveal trade secrets. Austin sat down, ordered coffee he didn't drink, and told us his story. It was identical to mine. Nathan had recruited him from his MBA program, promised mentorship and rapid advancement, spent 6 months building a termination file while pretending to support his development. The only difference was that Austin had signed the performance improvement plan, had spent 30 days desperately trying to meet impossible standards, and had been fired anyway with no severance. The day they escorted me out, Nathan took me aside and apologized, Austin said, and I could hear the bitterness in his voice. He said he'd fought for me, that he'd tried to convince HR to give me another chance, but that his hands were tied. He gave me this whole speech about how failure builds character and how I'd be better off starting over somewhere else. I believed him. I actually thanked him for trying to help me. Austin looked at me directly. Don't sign anything. Don't trust anything he says. And don't think for 1 second that HR or anyone else at that company will protect you. Because Nathan's been there for 12 years and brings in millions in revenue every quarter. You're expendable. He's not. Diana asked Austin if he'd be willing to provide a sworn statement about his experiences. He hesitated for a long time before agreeing. Why? I asked him. Why would you risk violating your NDA to help me? Austin finished his coffee in one long swallow. Because I spent 6 months in therapy trying to understand what I'd done wrong, why I couldn't cut it at a prestigious firm, why Nathan's mentorship hadn't saved me. Then I ran into another analyst who'd worked under him, a woman named Claire something, and she told me the exact same thing had happened to her. That's when I realized it wasn't about my performance. Nathan was using us for something, probably taking credit for our work with clients, while simultaneously positioning us as failures to protect himself from blame if anything went wrong. I couldn't prove it then. Maybe you can prove it now. He gave us Claire's contact information, left without finishing his coffee, and texted Diana 2 hours later with the name of the HR manager who'd processed his termination, a woman named Jennifer Blackwood, who still worked at Kellerman and Associates. By Wednesday morning, Diana had contacted 5 former Kellerman employees who'd worked under Nathan. 3 of them had nearly identical stories to mine and Austin's. All had been hired with promises of mentorship. All had been fired within a year for fabricated performance issues. All had signed NDAs that prevented them from speaking publicly about their experiences. And all of them were willing to provide sworn statements now because Diana had found a legal loophole. Their NDAs prohibited disparagement, but they didn't prohibit factual testimony in response to legal discovery. We have a pattern, Diana explained, spread out on her desk with 5 sworn affidavits, my recording from Monday's meeting, and a 3-inch stack of documentation. Nathan Davies has been systematically recruiting, exploiting, and terminating junior analysts for at least 4 years. The question is why? What's he gaining from this? Owen had the answer. He'd been digging through Kellerman's client lists, cross-referencing them with Nathan's alleged mentees. Every analyst Davies mentored worked on major accounts where there were either client complaints or projects that went over budget. He was using them as scapegoats. When something went wrong, he had documentation showing it was the analyst's fault, not his. It protected his reputation and his revenue while giving him an endless supply of junior talent whose work he could take credit for. That afternoon, Diana filed a formal complaint with Kellerman and Associates Board of Directors, copied to the company's general counsel, attaching every piece of evidence we'd gathered. The complaint outlined Nathan's pattern of misconduct, included sworn statements from 4 former employees, and demanded an immediate investigation. She also sent copies to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, just in case the company decided to bury the investigation internally. Now we wait, Diana said. Nathan will find out about this within 24 hours, and he's going to panic. People who've been getting away with something for years don't react well when they're suddenly exposed. Be ready for him to either try to cut a deal with you or to go nuclear and accelerate your termination. Either way, don't engage without me present. I didn't have to wait 24 hours. I got the call at 6 the next morning from Patricia Brennan, my manager. You need to come to the office immediately, she said, her voice tight. Don't talk to anyone. Don't stop at your desk. Come straight to conference room A. She hung up before I could respond. Conference room A was the big one, the one they used for major client presentations and board meetings. When I walked in at 7:15, I found Nathan, Patricia, Jennifer Blackwood from HR, and a man I didn't recognize in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Robert Ferris, senior partner and head of Kellerman's management committee. Sit down, Ferris said, gesturing to the chair across from them. They were all on one side of the table, me on the other, and I recognized immediately that this was an ambush. We've received some disturbing allegations, Ferris continued. Allegations that you illegally accessed confidential files belonging to Nathan Davies, that you violated company computer use policies, and that you've been spreading defamatory statements about Mr. Davies to former employees and external parties. We take these matters extremely seriously. He slid a piece of paper across to me. This is a cease and desist order. If you continue to access confidential files, contact former employees, or make false accusations, we will pursue legal action against you for theft of proprietary information, defamation, and breach of your employment agreement. Additionally, we are terminating your employment effective immediately for cause, which means no severance, no references, and forfeiture of any accrued vacation time. I looked at Nathan. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He sat there staring at the table, jaw clenched, and I realized he hadn't told them the full truth. He'd probably claimed I'd hacked his computer or stolen his password, that everything I'd found was obtained illegally. I have a recording of Nathan threatening to fire me for insubordination if I didn't sign a performance improvement plan without legal review, I said calmly. I have sworn statements from 4 former employees describing an identical pattern of fabricated performance issues and wrongful termination. And I have the email Nathan wrote detailing his 6-month plan to terminate me, which I accessed using the password he voluntarily gave me when he told me to log into his computer to retrieve a work file. So before you terminate me, you might want to talk to your legal department about how this will look in court. The room went silent. Jennifer Blackwood's pen froze mid-note. Patricia's expression shifted from stern to uncertain. Robert Ferris looked at Nathan, really looked at him, and said, "Is this true? Did you give him your password?" Nathan's composure cracked. "It's taken completely out of context. The email he's referring to was a draft of a performance management strategy, standard documentation that any supervisor would create. He's twisting it to make it sound sinister when it was simply me doing my job. His voice had that same reasonable, calm tone he'd used for 8 months, but now I could hear the desperation underneath it. And I certainly didn't give him permission to read through my personal emails. That's a massive violation of privacy and trust. I pulled out my phone and loaded the photos I'd taken. The email was addressed to your personal attorney with the subject line Phase 3, Final Documentation. It detailed fabricated performance issues, none of which you ever discussed with me, and outlined a strategy to terminate me while insulating the company from legal liability. That's not standard documentation. That's conspiracy to commit wrongful termination, and I have proof that you've done the exact same thing to at least 4 other analysts in the past 4 years. I looked at Ferris. My attorney has already filed complaints with the EEOC and your board of directors. This meeting? This is you trying to silence me before your clients find out that one of your senior partners has been systematically defrauding the company and destroying careers for his own benefit. The meeting lasted 3 more hours. Diana arrived within 30 minutes of my text, swept in with Owen carrying 2 briefcases full of documentation, and systematically dismantled every argument Ferris tried to make. She presented the sworn affidavits, the pattern of terminations, the client complaints that had been blamed on analysts who'd worked under Nathan, and the recording of Monday's meeting where Nathan had explicitly threatened me. Your company has 2 choices, Diana said, laying it out like she was presenting a business case. You can admit that Nathan Davies has been engaged in systematic misconduct, terminate him immediately, compensate his victims, and conduct an internal investigation to ensure this never happens again. Or you can try to protect him, in which case we will file a civil lawsuit that will expose every detail of his behavior, subpoena your client files to show the financial damage he's caused, and make sure every business publication in the country knows that Kellerman and Associates protects predatory managers over their employees. Your choice. Ferris asked for a recess to consult with the board. Nathan tried to follow him out of the conference room, but Ferris held up a hand. You stay here, he said, and I saw Nathan's face go pale. We sat in silence for 10 minutes, me, Diana, Owen on one side of the table, Nathan and Jennifer Blackwood on the other. Patricia had excused herself at some point. Nathan stared at his hands, picked at his cuticles, and I wondered what he was thinking. Was he calculating his next move, figuring out how to spin this to save his career? Was he angry at me for discovering his plan? Or was he finally, for the first time in 4 years, experiencing actual consequences for his actions? You destroyed people's lives, I said finally, breaking the silence. Austin Graves spent 6 months in therapy. Another analyst you fired developed an anxiety disorder. And for what? To protect your reputation? To take credit for our work? Nathan looked up at me, and for just a second, I saw something like shame cross his face before he looked away again. Ferris came back 45 minutes later with 2 other board members and the company's general counsel, a gray-haired woman named Elizabeth Chen, who looked like she hadn't slept in days. We've reviewed the materials your attorney provided, Ferris said, addressing me directly now. The board has voted to place Nathan Davies on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation. We're offering you a settlement, full reinstatement with no performance improvement plan, a written apology, and compensation equal to 6 months' salary in exchange for your agreement not to pursue external legal action. We're also prepared to offer similar settlements to the other former employees who've provided statements. Diana leaned over and whispered in my ear, It's a good offer, but we can probably get more if you're willing to push. I thought about Austin Graves, about the woman named Claire who'd figured out Nathan's pattern before any of us, about all the other analysts who might come after me if this wasn't addressed thoroughly. I want Nathan fired, I said. Not administrative leave, not a resignation where he gets to save face and move to another firm. Terminated for cause with a notation in his employment file that explicitly states why. And I want the company to establish an anonymous reporting system so employees can report supervisor misconduct without fear of retaliation. Those are my terms. Elizabeth, the general counsel, started to object, but Ferris cut her off. Done. Nathan, you're terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you out and arrange for your personal items to be shipped to you. Your company computer, phone, and access cards are to be surrendered before you leave the building. He stood up, and the meeting was over. Nathan sat frozen in his chair, staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, somewhere between hatred and disbelief. As security arrived to escort him out, he leaned across the table one last time. You have no idea what you've just done, he said quietly. This company will chew you up now that you don't have anyone protecting you. I met his eyes. You were never protecting me. You were destroying me slowly enough that I wouldn't notice until it was too late. The only difference between us is that I saw what you were doing before you could finish. They walked him out through the back exit so other employees wouldn't see. I learned later that the official story was Nathan had resigned to pursue other opportunities, but somehow word spread anyway. Within a week, 3 other senior partners had quietly left the firm, and the board initiated a company-wide review of performance management practices. Diana negotiated settlements for Austin and the other former analysts, all of whom received compensation and written apologies. The company established the anonymous reporting system I'd requested, named it the Employee Advocacy Resource, and put my name on a plaque in the break room as one of the program's founders, which felt both validating and deeply uncomfortable. I stayed at Kellerman & Associates for another 8 months, got promoted to senior analyst, and worked on some of the best projects of my career. But I never shook the feeling of being watched, never fully trusted anyone who was too friendly or too helpful, and eventually I took a job at a smaller firm where the politics felt less dangerous. Austin Graves called me 6 months after Nathan's termination. He'd been following the company's restructuring in the business press and wanted to thank me. "You did what I couldn't," he said. "You fought back when it mattered. I spent years thinking I was the problem, that I'd failed somehow. Now I know the truth, and that's worth more than any settlement." We met for coffee, swapped stories about our new jobs, and became something like friends. He told me that Claire, the analyst who'd figured out Nathan's pattern first, had gone on to start her own consulting firm and was crushing it. She said she never would have had the courage to go independent if Nathan hadn't shown her how corrupt the industry could be, Austin said. "I guess sometimes the worst experiences push you toward the best outcomes." I thought about that a lot in the months that followed. I'd walked into Kellerman & Associates terrified of failing, desperate to prove I belonged in the corporate world, willing to trust anyone who offered guidance. Nathan had exploited that vulnerability systematically, but in doing so, he'd also taught me to trust my own judgment, to document everything, and to fight back when something felt wrong. I wouldn't call it a silver lining. The anxiety dreams about reading his emails never fully went away. But I'd learned that sometimes the person destroying you hides behind a mentor's smile, and the only way to survive is to stop looking for protection and start protecting yourself. The last time I heard Nathan's name was almost 2 years later. Diana forwarded me a news article from a legal trade publication. Nathan Davies had been hired as a managing director at another consulting firm in another city, no mention in his bio of why he'd left Kellerman & Associates or the circumstances of his departure. "Corporate America has a short memory," Diana wrote in her email. "People like Davies always land on their feet. But at least you made sure he couldn't hurt anyone else at your company, and you gave other victims the courage to come forward. That matters." I read the article twice, felt that familiar surge of anger and frustration, and then closed the tab and went back to work. Diana was right. Nathan had moved on, probably already identifying his next targets, building relationships with junior analysts who'd trust him just like I had. But I'd survived him. I'd exposed him. And somewhere out there, Austin and Claire and all the others Nathan had tried to destroy were building careers and lives that proved his assessment of us had been wrong all along. If you made it this far, I hope you never have to find your name in someone else's private emails. I hope you never discover that the person you trusted most was documenting your destruction while smiling to your face. But if you do, remember this. Their documentation is evidence that works both ways, their patterns can be exposed, and their power only lasts as long as their victims stay silent. I saw my name in Nathan Davies' termination plan before he could finish writing it, and that advance warning saved my career. Not everyone gets that chance, but everyone deserves to know that fighting back is possible, that sometimes the person destroying you has left enough evidence to destroy themselves, and that justice, real, specific, documented justice, is worth every difficult conversation, every lawyer meeting, every moment of fear that comes with speaking truth to power. Nathan spent 6 months trying to erase me from his company. I spent 6 weeks erasing him instead, and I've never regretted it for a single day. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.